Tales from the Dragonsong War, a Malm in Her Shoes. Leveilleux. Alice took immense pride in her name. It served as a constant reminder to the world of her connection to her grandsire, the great Louisoix Leveilleux, the man who spared the realm of Eorzea from the worst ravages of the seventh umbral calamity. Needless to say, such noble heritage came with certain expectations, and she had worked tirelessly at the studium to surpass them. Despite her many laudable academic achievements, however, Alice's tomboyish behavior and sharp tongue, honed through years spent bickering with her equally gifted twin brother, had earned her the scorn of her peers. But Alice took solace in the thought that Louisoix had himself been possessed of a mischievous streak, and had never been one to suffer fools gladly. Having completed her schooling, Alice had travelled to Eorzea in a fever of expectation, eager to see the realm for which her grandsire had sacrificed so much, but what she found there was not at all as she had imagined. And so, after much soul-searching, she had resolved to explore the land in search of a cause for which to fight, a purpose of her own. She would travel alone, accompanied by neither servants nor adventurers, and certainly not by her brother, adamant that the impressions she formed be unsullied by the opinions of others. And now, after many days on the road, she found herself in the barren lands of Fanalan. Having toiled for malms in the relentless midday heat, she relented and sought refuge in a wayside tavern. "Stubborn bitch!" She squinted towards the source of the outburst, her eyes not yet adjusted to the dim interior, and made out a burly man towering over a young lady. The girl, a traveller, judging by her attire, stood undaunted, even as the brute raised a meaty fist. Alice sighed. She had grown weary of these barbaric people and their childish squabbles, but had not forgotten her grandfather's old admonishment. To ignore the plight of those one might conceivably save is not wisdom, it is indolence. "It is far too hot for fighting," Alice announced loudly, "but if you insist on hitting something, then I would be happy to arrange a meeting between you and the floor." Both quarrellers flinched at the sound of Alice's voice, turning to meet her cold gaze with almost identical expressions of stunned surprise. And thus did Alice make the acquaintance of young Amory, the travelling merchant. According to Amory, her caravan was ordinarily accompanied by a guard, but after said sellsword had unexpectedly refused the offer of a new contract, she had been left at the mercy of a customer who fought to intimidate her into accepting a less than favourable trade. Having witnessed how effortlessly Alice cowed the man, however, the merchant now seemed determined to convince her saviour to serve as the caravan's new escort. Like all roving peddlers, Amory explained, her associates made their living trading goods between far-flung settlements. But, she claimed, the traders of her particular caravan knew all of the shortest routes, and were famed for the swiftness with which they brought new wares to market. In short, one could wish for no finer employers. Despite the nakedness of Amory's patter, Alice found that she was enthralled. Every aspect of the merchant's nomadic lifestyle seemed unspeakably fascinating. Though she took pains to hide her enthusiasm, lest she seem ignorant of the world, the grin on the merchant's face suggested that Alice's attempt to feign this interest was less than successful. And so, after pausing as if to weigh the decision, she agreed. In the days that followed, Alice studied the merchant's ways, swiftly growing accustomed to their routine, such that when the caravan eventually pulled in to its next port of call, a village nestled at the base of the Sea of Spires, she felt like a changed woman. With new eyes, she appraised their destination. The settlement's central bazaar was meagre compared to the sprawling markets of Ul'dah, but the steady stream of visitors who came and went lent the place a kind of bustling energy. Though her duties had thus far asked little more of her than to clear obstinate flocks of old goats from the road, she breathed a sigh of relief as the wagons trundled safely into the village. "I shall never take caravan guards for granted again," she vowed, feeling utterly drained by the demands of constant vigilance. For a time, Alice simply stood and watched as the merchants hurried back and forth in a flurry of preparation. Her silent observations were soon interrupted, however, by the arrival of her breathless Amory. "There's much more to be done, Mrs. Leveilleux," the young woman chirped. "We'll need your help with the selling." "Selling? But I've no experience with—" Seizing her hand, Amory dragged Alize towards the stalls her colleagues had erected in the village square. Residents and visitors alike were already crowding around the merchants, inspecting the wares that neatly lined the makeshift shelves. Alize stopped short when she saw the swelling throng. This is a task for my brother, she thought, with a twinge of panic. If Alvina were here, he would already be striding into their midst, sporting that infernal grin of his. Yet even as she attempted to back away, the merchant girl yanked her forward once more. You remember the talk we had about pricing, don't you? Well, yes, but surely you do not expect me to. But Amory had already swiveled on her heels and begun serving a waiting customer, leaving Alize to talk to the breeze. She was still standing open-mouthed behind the counter, entertaining thoughts of escape, when a matronly middle-aged woman thrust a bolt of cloth towards her. "How much for this, then?" Alize stared blankly at the cloth, her mind in disarray, and then she glimpsed Amory's brief backwards glance and the mischievous smile that played on her lips. At least one of us is enjoying this. The noise in the square rose as the haggling began in earnest, and Alize permitted herself a sigh. After a hard day's bargaining, the caravan had sold much of its stock, and that evening the merchants retired to a dilapidated inn on the edge of the village proper. Exhausted, Alize sat down heavily on one of the two beds in her cramped room and began flicking through the volume on arcane theories she had purchased during her stay in Ulda. Ever since her days as a student, it had been a nightly ritual for her to open a book before bed and note down new findings in her journal. Should she discover any promising techniques, she would rise early the following morning and attempt to put her learning into practice. But hours of unfamiliar work had taken their toll, and she was only a few lines into her current chapter when her eyelids began to droop. By the time Amory came in, she was all but asleep. The merchant girl stifled a laugh as Alize snatched reflexively at the tome that had begun to slide from her lap. "Sorry for dragging you along today," Amory said, smiling. "I thought you might find it entertaining." "'Twas certainly an experience," Alize replied with a tired grin. Amory sat down on the bed opposite and glanced at Alize's book with interest. "You never miss a day, do you?" she said, shaking her head. "Trying to keep up with that brother of yours, eh?" "Mayhap, at first," Alize admitted, "but it was my grandfather who taught me the value of reading, and it is a habit that I am proud to have maintained." "It is well that you respect your grandsire's teachings, Alize, but I doubt he meant for you to fall asleep sitting up," Amory chided gently. With that, she took the still open volume perched on Alize's knees, flipped the silk bookmark back into place, and snapped it shut. "I hadn't finished," Alize managed, even as the girl dropped the book onto the pile of her belongings. Amory stretched and yawned. "It will still be there on the morrow," she said, and then her impish grin returned. "And it's not as if you didn't learn a few things today. You made your first sale, for heaven's sakes. I'm certain both Nautfal and your grandsire would forgive you for missing a single night of study." Ordinarily, Alize would not countenance such convenient excuses, but the warmth of Amory's manner had disarmed her. There was a familiar kindness in her words that set Alize's heart at ease. Both girls readied themselves for bed, and Amory illuminated the room with another of her radiant smiles before reaching out to extinguish the lamp. "Sleep well." And that was the last night Alize would spend in her young friend's company. A sliver of sunlight fell across Alize's face, and she slowly opened her eyes. Pulling herself up to a sitting position, she spent a moment looking around before remembering where she was, in one of the private rooms of a Gridanian inn. The day had just dawned, and she had been dreaming. The journey she made with Amory had ended long ago, the vault of her mind the only place where she would ever see the girl again. On the day following Alize's debut as a merchant, the caravan had set off for its next destination during one of Fenland's rare thunderstorms. The deluge made it hard to see and still harder to steer, so the wagons were spaced out more than usual as they slipped and slid along a muddy path that cut through an otherwise impassable bluff. A muffled rumble was the only warning they had before the cliffsides collapsed. In the space of a heartbeat, the carriages bringing up the rear and all who rode aboard them were buried beneath a mountain of sodden earth, and Amory was gone. As fate would have it, Alize had been riding on the lead wagon and emerged from the ordeal without so much as a bruise. She duly carried out her contract, escorting the surviving merchants to the next town before bidding them farewell. Mind still numb with shock, she was some distance away when she chanced to glance back at the caravan and saw how few of the wagons remained. Her chest constricted with sudden grief, and the tears finally fell. After that, Alice had returned to traveling alone, finding the memory of each new meeting and parting away inside her breast, and taking none into her confidence. It was in the lonely days that followed that she chanced to hear rumors of an unknown band of heroes that appeared to be doing the work of the Scions, and thus, at long last, she found a purpose. The gossip in the ports made much of the recent events in Isgard, but she doggedly followed the underlying thread of primal activity. Alice would learn the nature of these champions whose course appeared destined to cross that of her brother and his comrades. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, stretched and threw open the shutters. As she gazed out at the morning sky, a fragment of her dream rose unbidden, the image of Amory's smiling face. Alice recalled the girl's well-meaning words with an aching sadness. Some things do not last until tomorrow. Thank you for listening to Tales from the Dragonsong War, a Malm in Her Shoes.